Pack your bags, Noelle. My girlfriend's moving in tomorrow. Colby sneered as Henrietta smirked behind him, already wearing my wedding ring. I left with nothing but a suitcase and shattered dreams. 6 weeks later, Henrietta was sobbing on my doorstep, begging me not to evict them. Turns out the lake house was never Colby's. I'd inherited it years ago, and they'd been squatting in my property all along. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our lake house. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Casting golden reflections across the hardwood floors I'd spent countless weekends polishing, I stood in the kitchen, still in my silk pajamas, preparing Colby's favorite blueberry pancakes, a Sunday tradition we'd maintained for 3 years of marriage. The smell of maple syrup filled the air, mingling with the scent of fresh coffee from our expensive espresso machine.
Noelle!
Colby's voice boomed from upstairs, sharp and commanding in a way that made my stomach clench. "Get up here, now." I turned off the burner and climbed the curved staircase, my bare feet silent on the polished wood. Our bedroom door stood wide open, and what I saw inside made my blood freeze. Henrietta Brooks, my former best friend since college, sat perched on the edge of our king-sized bed, legs crossed elegantly, wearing nothing but Colby's dress shirt. Her platinum blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders like silk, and her emerald eyes held a cruel satisfaction I'd never seen before. But what stopped my heart completely was the flash of gold on her left hand.
My wedding ring.
The vintage Art Deco diamond that had belonged to Colby's grandmother, now adorning Henrietta's perfectly manicured finger. "There she is," Colby said, his voice dripping with false cheerfulness. He stood by our walk-in closet, already fully dressed in his weekend casual clothes, designer jeans and a polo shirt I'd bought him for his birthday. My soon-to-be ex-wife. The words hit me like a physical blow. "What's going on here?" I managed, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. Henrietta uncrossed her legs and stood up slowly, deliberately, like a cat stretching after a nap. "Oh, sweetie," she purred, her southern accent more pronounced than usual. "Didn't Colby tell you? We've been seeing each other for months now, and well," she held up her hand, letting my ring catch the morning light. "He finally made an honest woman out of me." "That's impossible," I said, backing toward the doorway. "We're married, legally married." Colby laughed, a sound I'd once found charming but now felt like broken glass in my ears. "Not for long. My lawyers already filed the papers." Irreconcilable differences. He walked to our dresser and picked up a manila envelope, holding it out to me like a peace offering. "Don't worry, I'm not heartless. You can keep your car and whatever personal items you brought into the marriage." Personal items? The words felt foreign on my tongue. "Colby, this is our home. We built this life together." "Actually," Henrietta chimed in, examining her nails with theatrical boredom, "this has always been Colby's family property. The Brooks family has owned this lake house for generations, haven't you, darling?" She looked at him with adoring eyes, the same way I used to look at him. Colby nodded solemnly. "It's true, Noelle. My grandfather left it to me when he passed. You've just been, well, living here as my wife. But since that's changing," he gestured vaguely toward the door. My legs felt unsteady. 3 years of marriage, 5 years together total, and this was how it ended. In our bedroom, with my best friend wearing my ring and my husband treating me like an unwelcome houseguest. "The pancakes are burning," I said stupidly, because my brain couldn't process anything else. "Oh, don't worry about breakfast," Henrietta said, rising from the bed and wrapping her arms around Colby's waist. "I'll be taking care of the cooking from now on." Among other things, she pressed a kiss to his neck, her eyes locked on mine with predatory satisfaction. "Pack your bags, Noelle," Colby said, his voice matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. "My girlfriend's moving in tomorrow, and we need the space. Her furniture is much more sophisticated than yours anyway." I felt something crack inside my chest, like ice breaking under pressure. "My furniture, Colby, I paid for half of everything in this house. The sectional sofa, the dining room set, that espresso machine you love so much. Receipts, or it didn't happen, Henrietta interrupted with a laugh. And even if you did contribute, well, gifts between spouses don't exactly get returned, do they? The manila envelope in Colby's hand seemed to grow heavier as he continued holding it out. The divorce papers are pretty standard. I'm keeping the house, obviously, since it's family property. You'll get your car, your clothes, and we'll call it even. No alimony, no asset division. Clean break, I repeated numbly. That's right, he said, his tone almost gentle now, as if he were explaining something to a child. Look, Noelle, we both know this marriage hasn't been working for a while. You're always so focused on your little interior design business, never present, never really here for me emotionally. Henrietta understands what a man needs. Henrietta's smile was radiant. I'm just so much more compatible with Colby's lifestyle. We have the same interests, the same social circle, the same, she paused dramatically, ambitions. I looked around the bedroom that had been my sanctuary for 3 years. The custom window treatments I'd designed and installed myself. The antique vanity I'd found at an estate sale and lovingly restored. The wedding photos on the nightstand, now face down as if they'd already been discarded. How long? I asked quietly. How long what? Colby's impatience was beginning to show. How long have you two been planning this? Henrietta and Colby exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Henrietta shrugged. Since your anniversary party last month. You remember, the one where you spent the entire evening talking to clients instead of paying attention to your husband. Colby and I just connected. My anniversary party. The celebration I'd organized to commemorate 3 years of marriage, inviting all our friends and family to the lake house. The night I'd been networking with potential clients because my design business was finally taking off, because I thought Colby would be proud of my success. So while I was working to build our future, I said slowly, you were planning to destroy it. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Henrietta said, waving her hand dismissively.
It's not like you're losing everything.
You're young, reasonably attractive when you make an effort, and you have that little hobby business of yours. You'll bounce back. Hobby business, my interior design firm that I'd built from nothing, that was finally starting to turn a real profit, that represented years of hard work and creativity, reduced to a hobby. Colby cleared his throat. Look, Noelle, this doesn't have to be ugly. We can handle this like adults. Pack your things, sign the papers, and we can all move on with our lives. I took the envelope from his hand, feeling its weight. Inside were papers that would dissolve 3 years of marriage, 3 years of building a life together, 3 years of believing in a future that apparently never existed. The pancakes are definitely burning now, I said, because it was the only thing my shocked brain could focus on. We'll order takeout, Henrietta said brightly. I know this amazing little French place that delivers. And in that moment, standing in my own bedroom, while my husband and former best friend discussed their breakfast plans, I realized that my old life was already over. What I didn't know yet was that my new life, my real life, was about to begin. The lake house held secrets that neither Colby nor Henrietta could imagine, and soon they would learn that not everything was as it appeared to be. 6 months earlier, my world had been completely different. I was Noelle Livingston then, living in a cozy downtown apartment above my interior design studio, refined spaces, building a business that was finally gaining momentum after 2 years of struggle. My days were filled with client consultations, fabric samples, and the satisfying challenge of transforming empty rooms into beautiful functional spaces. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing paint swatches for the Henderson family's living room renovation. My hands were covered in fabric samples when my phone rang, displaying Mercy General Hospital on the screen. Miss Livingston? This is Dr. Patricia Vaughn from Mercy General. I'm calling about your grandmother, Sally Brewster. My heart stopped. Grandma Sally had raised me since I was 7. After my parents died in a plane crash. She was the only family I had left, the woman who taught me everything about grace, strength, and finding beauty in simple things. She was brought in this morning after a neighbor found her unconscious in her garden. Dr. Vaughn continued gently. I'm afraid it was a massive stroke. We did everything we could, but the damage was too extensive. I'm so sorry. The fabric samples scattered to the floor as my legs gave out. Sally Brewster, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 83 years old, had been tending her prize-winning roses when her body finally betrayed her. The woman who had survived the Great Depression, raised 4 children, buried a husband, and still found joy in every sunrise was gone. The funeral was small but beautiful, held at the little chapel where Grandma Sally had played piano for 40 years. Colby Howard appeared at the service like an answer to a prayer I didn't know I'd been making. We'd met 3 months earlier at a charity gala, where I was donating design services for the silent auction. He was charming, successful, and most importantly, he seemed genuinely interested in my dreams and ambitions. "You shouldn't be alone right now," he'd said after the service, his hand warm and steady on my shoulder. "Come stay at the lake house for a few weeks. You need time to grieve properly." I'd protested initially. We'd only been dating for 3 months, and staying at his family's property felt too intimate, too presumptuous. But Colby was insistent, and I was drowning in loneliness and paperwork. Grandma Sally's modest estate needed to be settled, her little house sold, and I had no idea how to navigate the legal complexities while running my business and processing my grief. My grandfather's lake house has been in the Howard family for generations, Colby had explained as we drove through the winding roads toward Lake Serenity. "It's peaceful there, exactly what you need right now." The first time I saw the property, I fell in love instantly. The house sat on 3 acres of pristine lakefront, a stunning craftsman-style home, with a wraparound porch and windows that seemed to capture every angle of natural light. The interior was beautifully appointed, but clearly needed a designer's touch, something I mentioned to Colby as we walked through the rooms. "You could redecorate however you want," he'd said, pulling me close. "Think of it as a project to keep your mind occupied." Those first weeks at the lake house were a blur of estate lawyers, insurance claims, and late-night phone calls with Grandma Sally's neighbors who wanted to share memories. Colby was patient and supportive, bringing me coffee when I worked late, rubbing my shoulders when the stress became overwhelming, and never once complaining about the chaos my grief had brought into his orderly life. "I don't know what I would have done without you," I told him one evening, as we sat on the dock watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and rose. "You'll never have to find out," he'd replied, kissing my temple. "We're partners now." The proposal came 2 months later, on Christmas Eve, as we stood in front of the massive stone fireplace I'd helped him redecorate. The ring was his grandmother's, a stunning Art Deco diamond that caught the firelight like captured stars. "Marry me, Noelle," he'd said, dropping to one knee on the Persian rug I'd chosen for the living room. "Make this house a home. Make me a better man." I said yes without hesitation. Colby had been my anchor during the worst period of my life, and the lake house had become my sanctuary. We were married the following spring in a simple ceremony on the back lawn, with the lake as our backdrop, and Henrietta as my maid of honor. Henrietta Brooks had been my college roommate and closest friend for over 8 years. She was everything I wasn't: bold where I was cautious, outgoing where I was reserved, confident in a way that drew people like moths to flame. She'd been genuinely happy for my engagement, helping me plan every detail of the wedding, and gushing about how perfect Colby and I were together. "You deserve this happiness," she'd said, while helping me into my wedding dress. "After everything you've been through, you deserve a fairy tale ending." The first year of marriage was blissful. I moved my design business to a small office space in the nearby town of Millbrook, commuting 20 minutes each way, but loving the separation between home and work. Colby's commercial real estate career was thriving, and he encouraged my professional growth, even helping me land several high-profile clients through his business connections. I threw myself into making the lake house perfect, our perfect sanctuary. Every room became a canvas for my creativity, and Colby seemed to love my vision for modernizing the space while respecting its historical character. I spent weekends antiquing for the perfect pieces, carefully selected every paint color, and slowly transformed the Howard family property into something that felt like ours. "You have such an incredible eye," Colby would say, admiring my latest project. "This place has never looked better." But somewhere in the second year, things began to shift. Colby started working longer hours, traveling more frequently for business deals. When he was home, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone, always one conversation away from wherever he really wanted to be. I told myself it was natural, the honeymoon phase ending, real life settling in. I focused on my business, which was growing beyond my wildest dreams, and on maintaining the home that had become my pride and joy. What I didn't realize was that the foundation I thought we'd built together was already cracking, and the life I'd created was about to shatter completely. The weeks following Grandma Sally's funeral passed in a haze of legal paperwork and overwhelming decisions. Her modest house on Maple Street needed to be cleaned out, appraised, and sold. The estate lawyer, a kind but efficient man, named Ronald Brewster, explained that while Sally had left everything to me, there were outstanding medical bills and property taxes that would consume most of the inheritance. Your grandmother was house rich but cash poor, he explained gently during our first meeting. The property is worth about $180,000, but after debts and expenses, you'll be lucky to clear $40,000. I sat in his office, surrounded by manila folders and legal documents that felt like a foreign language, trying to process how to dismantle a lifetime of memories while keeping my design business afloat. My small downtown apartment suddenly felt cramped and lonely, filled with boxes of Sally's belongings I couldn't bear to part with yet, had nowhere to store. That's when Colby stepped in like a knight in shining armor. "This is ridiculous," he said one evening, finding me on my apartment floor, surrounded by photo albums and Sally's china collection. "You're torturing yourself trying to do this alone. Come stay at the lake house while you sort everything out." I looked up from a box of my grandmother's recipe cards, my eyes probably red from crying over her handwritten notes about Sunday dinners and holiday traditions. "Colby, we've only been dating 3 months. I can't just move in with you." He sat down beside me on the floor, carefully moving aside a stack of Sally's quilting magazines. "You're not moving in, you're recovering. There's a difference." His voice was gentle but firm. "Look at yourself, Noelle. When's the last time you had a proper meal, or 8 hours of sleep? You're running yourself into the ground." He wasn't wrong. Since Sally's death, I'd been surviving on coffee and takeout, working 16-hour days between client meetings and estate responsibilities. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a woman I barely recognized, hollow-eyed, thin, fragile in a way that scared me. "The lake house has plenty of space," Colby continued, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "You could spread out, take your time with Sally's things. The fresh air and quiet would do you good." And honestly, he smiled that charming smile that had first caught my attention at the charity gala. "I'd sleep better knowing you're somewhere safe and peaceful." The offer was tempting. My apartment felt suffocating, filled with the overwhelming task of sorting through a lifetime of possessions, while trying to maintain some semblance of professional normalcy. The idea of space, of lake views instead of brick walls, of someone caring enough to want to take care of me. It was exactly what my broken heart needed to hear. "Are you sure?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "I don't want to impose on your space, and I have no idea how long this will take." "Take as long as you need," he said, kissing my forehead with such tenderness that fresh tears spilled over. "We're partners in this, remember? Partners support each other." The next morning, Colby arrived with his SUV to help load my essential belongings and several boxes of Sally's most precious items. He was patient and gentle, wrapping her china in bubble wrap like each piece was made of spun gold, carefully boxing her photo albums in chronological order because he'd noticed that's how I preferred to organize things. "Tell me about this one," he said, holding up a black and white photo of Sally as a young woman standing beside a handsome man in a military uniform. "That's my grandfather, James. He died in Korea when my father was just a baby." I traced the edges of the photograph with my finger. "Sally always said he had the kindest eyes she'd ever seen." Colby studied the photo thoughtfully. "She was beautiful. I can see where you get it from." The drive to Lake Serenity took 45 minutes through winding country roads that gradually transformed from suburban sprawl to rolling hills dotted with farmhouses and horse pastures. As we climbed higher into the hills, the air seemed cleaner, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe properly. "There it is," Colby said as we rounded a bend, and suddenly the lake spread out before us like a mirror reflecting the sky. The Howard family lake house sat on a gentle slope overlooking the water, surrounded by mature oak and maple trees that created natural privacy from the few other homes scattered around the lake's perimeter. The house itself was stunning, a sprawling craftsman style with river stone pillars, cedar shake, siding weathered to a soft gray, and a wraparound porch that seemed to invite long conversations and lazy afternoons. Colby, it's beautiful, I breathed, stepping out of the car and breathing in air that smelled of pine needles and lake water. Built by my great-grandfather in 1924, he said, with obvious pride, carrying my suitcases toward the front door. 3 generations of Howard men have brought their wives here. My grandfather proposed to my grandmother on that dock. He pointed to a wooden pier that extended into the lake, where a small sailboat bobbed gently in the late afternoon breeze. Inside, the house was even more impressive. Soaring ceilings with exposed beams, a massive stone fireplace that dominated the living room, hardwood floors that gleamed with decades of careful maintenance. The furniture was classic and comfortable, leather sofas that looked perfectly broken in, antique rugs that added warmth and character, built-in bookshelves filled with volumes that spoke of generations of readers. The master bedroom has the best lake view, Colby said, leading me upstairs. But if you'd prefer privacy, there's a beautiful guest suite on the other side of the house with its own bathroom and sitting area. I chose the guest suite, not because I didn't trust Colby, but because I needed space to grieve properly, to spread out Sally's belongings, and process my loss without feeling like I was imposing on his intimate space. The room was perfect, decorated in soothing blues and whites with French doors that opened onto a small balcony overlooking the lake. "Thank you," I said, as Colby set my suitcases on the vintage luggage rack. "I know this is a lot to ask." He turned and pulled me into his arms, holding me close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with the fresh lake air. "You're not asking for anything, Noelle. I'm offering because I care about you, because I want to take care of you." Standing in that beautiful room, surrounded by peace and comfort, held by a man who seemed to understand exactly what I needed, I felt safer than I had since Sally's death. What I didn't realize was that safety could be an illusion, and sometimes the most beautiful cages are the hardest to recognize. The first week at the lake house felt like stepping into a dream I didn't know I'd been having. I woke each morning to sunlight streaming through gauze curtains and the gentle sound of water lapping against the dock. Colby would bring me coffee in bed, perfectly prepared with the exact amount of cream I preferred, before leaving for his real estate office in town. "Take your time settling in," he'd say, kissing my forehead like we'd been married for years instead of dating for months. "This is your home now, for as long as you need it." I spent those first days exploring the property and slowly unpacking Sally's belongings. The house seemed to welcome her things. Her antique sewing box looked perfect on the writing desk in the sitting room. Her collection of crystal vases caught the light beautifully on the kitchen windowsill. For the first time since her death, touching her possessions didn't bring overwhelming sadness, but rather a sense of connection, as if she was somehow present in this peaceful place. Colby was the perfect host. He stocked the refrigerator with all my favorite foods, replaced the harsh overhead lighting in my room with softer table lamps, and even bought a small bookshelf where I could display Sally's collection of gardening guides and romance novels. When he found me crying over her recipe box one afternoon, he didn't ask questions or try to fix anything. He simply sat beside me and held my hand until the wave of grief passed. "You're so patient with me," I said that evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of coral and gold. "Grief isn't something you rush through," he replied, refilling my wine glass. "My mother took 2 years to feel human again after my father died. Everyone heals at their own pace." It was the first time he'd mentioned his parents' deaths, and I realized how little I actually knew about Colby's family history. "How old were you when you lost them?" 15 when Dad had his heart attack, 22 when Mom passed from cancer. His voice carried old pain carefully contained. "That's when I inherited this place. I was too young to really appreciate it then, but now," he gestured toward the lake where a family of ducks glided past. "Now I understand why 3 generations of Howard men chose to make their lives here." The way he said it, "make their lives here," carried weight that made my chest flutter with possibility. Was he suggesting a future together? The thought should have felt premature, but sitting in this beautiful place with this caring man, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. As the days passed, I began to establish routines that felt surprisingly domestic. I'd wake early to walk the property perimeter, discovering hidden gardens and stone pathways that previous generations had built. The exercise helped clear my mind for the day's work, phone calls with estate lawyers, meetings with potential buyers for Sally's house, and slowly rebuilding my client roster. Colby encouraged my work efforts with enthusiasm that felt genuine. "You're incredibly talented," he said one evening, reviewing the portfolio of before and after photos from my recent projects. "These transformations are remarkable. You have a gift for seeing potential where others see problems." He even helped me set up a temporary office in the sunroom, moving furniture and setting up proper lighting so I could work on design proposals during the day. "Consider this an investment in our future," he said when I protested that he was doing too much. "Your success is my success now." The word "our" in that sentence made my heart skip, but I tried not to read too much into it. Colby was generous by nature. That much was clear from how he'd opened his family home to me during my most vulnerable time. By the second week, I felt comfortable enough to start making small improvements around the house. Nothing major, just little touches that would enhance the existing beauty. I rearranged the living room furniture to better capture the lake view, added fresh flowers from the garden to the dining room table, and reorganized the kitchen to be more functional for daily cooking. "You've brought this place to life," Colby said one evening, admiring the way I'd styled the mantelpiece. With a combination of his family photos and Sally's vintage candlesticks, it's never felt more like home. I glowed under his praise, feeling useful and appreciated in a way that helped heal the raw edges of my grief. This was what partnership looked like, I thought. Two people supporting each other, creating something beautiful together. The rules of the house revealed themselves gradually, not as restrictions but as natural rhythms that made life easier. Colby preferred quiet mornings before work, so I learned to save our conversations for evening hours. He was particular about cleanliness, so I made sure to clean up after my design work and keep Sally's unpacked boxes neatly organized in the spare bedroom. He liked punctual meals, so I began planning dinners that would be ready when he returned from the office. None of it felt oppressive. Quite the opposite. Having structure and someone to care for gave my days purpose beyond grief and paperwork. When Colby smiled appreciatively at a perfectly timed dinner or complimented how fresh and organized the house looked, I felt valuable in a way I hadn't experienced since Sally's death. "You're a natural at this," he said one Friday evening, settling into his favorite leather chair with a glass of wine, while I finished arranging fresh lilacs in a vase. "Some women struggle with domestic life, but you make it look effortless." I paused, my hands stilling on the flower stems. Something about the phrase domestic life felt loaded, but Colby's expression was nothing but admiring. "I enjoy taking care of things," I said carefully. "It feels good to create beauty and order." "That's what makes you special," he replied, raising his glass in a small toast. "You understand what really matters: home, family, building something lasting together." As I clinked my glass against his, watching the last rays of sunlight dance across the lake through windows I'd cleaned that morning, I felt a deep contentment settle in my chest. This was healing. This was what moving forward looked like. This was the beginning of the life I'd always hoped to build with someone who truly valued me. What I didn't recognize yet was how carefully I was being molded, how my gratitude was being shaped into dependence, and how my desire to contribute was slowly becoming an expectation that would grow heavier with each passing day. The shift happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice it at first. It started with small suggestions that seemed motivated by genuine care for my well-being. "You've been working so hard lately," Colby said one morning over breakfast, watching me review client proposals while eating toast. "Maybe you should take a break from new projects until you finish dealing with Sally's estate." I looked up from the Henderson family's kitchen renovation plans. Actually, staying busy helps me process the grief, and I can't afford to turn away clients right now. The estate settlement is taking longer than expected. Colby's brow furrowed with what looked like genuine concern. "Darling, you don't need to worry about money while you're here. Let me cover your expenses until things settle down. You're under enough stress without adding financial pressure." The offer was generous, but something about it made me uncomfortable. "That's incredibly sweet," but I need to maintain my independence. My business is finally gaining momentum. I can't just pause it indefinitely. Independence, he repeated thoughtfully, buttering his toast with precise strokes. That's admirable, Noelle, but sometimes accepting help is actually stronger than struggling alone. Look how much better you've been sleeping since you came here. Your color is back. You're eating regularly. Why jeopardize that recovery for a few design projects? He had a point about my improved health. The lake house had been a sanctuary, and Colby's care had helped me heal in ways I hadn't expected. But my work wasn't just about money, it was about purpose, creativity, and the professional identity I'd worked years to build. The Morrison project could really establish my reputation, I explained, showing him the photos of the sprawling Victorian they wanted renovated. They're well connected in the community. This could lead to bigger opportunities. Colby studied the images with the analytical eye he used for his commercial properties. That house is in Riverside Heights, isn't it? That's a 45-minute drive from here, each way. Nearly 2 hours of commuting every time you need to meet with them or supervise work. Is that really practical? I hadn't considered the travel time, and he was right. It would be significant. I could work around it. Maybe schedule longer site visits, plan multiple meetings in one day. Or, Colby said gently, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his, you could focus on clients closer to home. I know several business owners in Millbrook who could use design services, local projects, reasonable commute, and I could provide personal recommendations. The suggestion made sense logically, but something about it felt limiting. Riverside Heights represented the kind of upscale market I'd been working toward, clients with substantial budgets and influential social networks. Millbrook was charming, but the projects would likely be smaller, less lucrative, and wouldn't provide the same professional growth opportunities. Let me think about it, I said, which seemed to satisfy him for the moment. But the subject came up again the next week when Henrietta called to invite me for lunch in the city. I miss you, her voice bubbled through the phone. It feels like you've disappeared since the funeral. I know you're grieving, but hiding away isn't healthy. Come meet me at that bistro we love. We'll shop, get pedicures, do all our usual girl things. The idea sounded wonderful. I hadn't seen Henrietta since Sally's funeral, and I missed my friend's energy and laughter. That sounds perfect. I'll drive down Saturday morning. But when I mentioned the plans to Colby that evening, his expression grew troubled. Saturday, that's when the Hendersons want to meet about their project timeline. I thought you were planning to decline that job. I haven't decided yet, I said, surprised by his assumption, and I could meet with them next week instead. Colby was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass as he stared out at the lake. It's just that Henrietta has a way of stirring up drama. Remember how chaotic things got whenever you two went out together in college? The late nights, the poor decisions, the hangovers that lasted for days. I laughed, remembering some of our more adventurous evenings. We were 22, Colby. We're adults now. It's just lunch and maybe some shopping.
Of course, he said quickly.
I'm not trying to control your friendships. I just worry about you pushing yourself too hard too soon. You've been doing so well here, so peaceful and centered. I'd hate to see you spiral back into that anxious, overwhelmed state you were in after Sally died. His words carried the weight of recent memory, those dark weeks when I had been barely functioning, when simple decisions felt overwhelming, and I could barely manage basic self-care. The contrast with how stable I felt now was stark. And Colby was right, that much of that improvement came from the safe, structured environment he'd provided. Maybe we could invite Henrietta here instead, he suggested. Show her the lake house, have a nice dinner together. That way you can see your friend without the stress of driving and city chaos. It was a reasonable compromise, and I found myself agreeing. When I called Henrietta back to suggest the change, her reaction was immediate and sharp. He doesn't want you coming to the city. Noelle? That's weird. You've been practically MIA for months, and now your boyfriend is dictating where we can meet? It's not like that, I protested, though her words made me uncomfortable. He's just concerned about my stress levels. I've been through a lot lately, which is exactly why you need your friends, she shot back. Honey, I love that you found someone who takes care of you, but isolation isn't healing. It's concerning. Her words echoed in my mind after we hung up. But when Colby returned from work that evening with fresh flowers and my favorite takeout from the Thai restaurant in town, her concerns seemed overblown. He listened attentively as I described my day, praised the way I'd rearranged the bookshelves in the living room, and suggested we start planning a garden renovation project together. We could create something beautiful, he said, pulling me close as we stood on the porch watching fireflies dance over the lake, something that's uniquely ours. The word ours still made my heart flutter, and in his arms surrounded by the peace and beauty of the lake house, Henrietta's warnings felt like echoes from a more chaotic life I was glad to leave behind. What I didn't recognize was that the boundaries being drawn around my life, presented as protection and care, were slowly becoming a cage that would grow smaller with each passing day. 3 months after moving to the lake house, I finally worked up the courage to clean out the last of Sally's belongings stored in my old apartment. The lease was ending, and I'd been putting off this final task, dreading the emotional weight of sorting through the remaining boxes I'd been too overwhelmed to handle initially. Colby offered to help, but something made me want to do this alone, a need to say goodbye to my grandmother privately, without well-meaning commentary or suggestions about what to keep or donate. I told him I was meeting a potential client in the city, which felt like a small lie but necessary for my emotional process. The storage unit I'd rented held the furniture and larger items from Sally's house that I couldn't bear to sell immediately. Her antique secretary desk, her hope chest, her sewing machine, and several boxes of documents I'd hastily packed during those overwhelming weeks after the funeral. I started with the hope chest, carefully lifting out quilts she'd made by hand, baby clothes from when she'd raised my father, and photo albums documenting decades of family history. At the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was something I'd never seen before, a large manila envelope with "For Noelle, when you're ready" written in Sally's careful script. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were legal documents, bank statements, and a letter in Sally's handwriting dated just 6 months before her death. "My dearest Noelle," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I've gone to join your grandfather and parents, and you're handling my affairs. I've kept something from you, not out of deception, but because I wanted you to build your own life first, to know your own strength before you learned about this gift." My heart pounded as I read on. Your great-grandfather, James Brewster Sr., wasn't just a farmer as the family always claimed. He was also a shrewd investor who bought land all around Lake Serenity in the 1940s when no one thought it was worth anything. When developers came calling in the 1980s, we sold most of it for substantial profit, but I kept 3 pieces: the old farmhouse lot where your grandfather and I lived, and 2 parcels of undeveloped lakefront property. I stopped reading, my mind reeling. Lakefront property around Lake Serenity was incredibly valuable now, some of the most expensive real estate in the county. The farmhouse has been sold to cover my debts as you expected, but the 2 lakefront parcels are yours now. They've been held in a trust that I established years ago, managed by my attorney, Archer Levingston, at the law firm downtown. I never told you because I wanted you to marry for love, not money, and to build a career because you had passion for it, not because you felt financially secure. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the letter. The total value of both properties is approximately $2.8 million. There's also a money market account that's been collecting dividends from some smaller investments over the years. Last I checked, it held about $400,000. Archer has all the details and has been instructed to transfer everything to you upon my death. I sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, surrounded by dusty boxes and covered furniture, trying to process what I'd just learned. Sally had left me nearly $3.2 million, and I'd been living like a charity case, accepting Colby's generosity and gradually surrendering my independence because I thought I had no other choice. The letter continued, "I know this is overwhelming, darling. Take time to decide what you want to do with this gift. But remember what I always taught you, your worth isn't measured by what you own, but by who you are and how you treat others. This money is a tool, not a definition of your value." She'd included business cards for Archer Levingston and a financial advisor named Gemma Brooks, along with account numbers and detailed instructions for accessing the trust. I drove to Archer Levingston's office in a daze, the documents clutched in my purse like a secret that could change everything. His secretary, a efficient woman in her 60s, immediately recognized Sally's name and ushered me into his office. "Miss Brewster, I've been expecting you," Archer said, rising from behind an imposing oak desk. He was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes and a warm handshake. "Your grandmother spoke of you often. She was very proud of your design business." Over the next hour, he walked me through the trust documents, the property deeds, and the investment accounts. Everything Sally had written was true. I was now worth over $3 million. "She was very specific about timing," Archer explained. "She wanted you to have at least 6 months to grieve and process her loss before learning about this inheritance. She felt it was important for you to experience your own resilience first." As I sat in his office, holding deeds to properties worth more than most people's homes, one thought kept circling in my mind. Colby had no idea. For months, he'd been positioning himself as my financial savior, while I actually had more money than he could imagine. The question was what to do with that knowledge, and whether the man I was falling in love with would still want me if he knew I didn't need his rescue after all. The drive back to the lake house felt surreal, as if I were floating through a dream where nothing was quite what it seemed. The manila envelope containing my inheritance documents sat on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon, and I found myself checking the rearview mirror constantly, as though someone might be following me with knowledge of my newfound wealth. I decided not to tell Colby immediately. Something about Sally's letter, her emphasis on experiencing my own resilience first, made me want to sit with this information privately. Besides, I reasoned, we'd only been together 6 months total. Financial discussions could wait until our relationship was more established. But secrets have a way of creating awareness, and over the following weeks, I began noticing things about Colby that I'd previously overlooked or interpreted charitably. The first red flag came during a dinner party at his colleague's house. Marcus Brewster, a real estate developer who'd apparently known Colby for years, was discussing local property values over wine and dessert. "The lakefront market is absolutely insane right now," Marcus said, gesturing with his wine glass. "I've got clients offering $2 million cash for properties that sold for $300K just 5 years ago. If I owned anything on Lake Serenity, I'd sell tomorrow and retire early." I watched Colby's reaction carefully. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his fingers drummed against his thigh, a nervous habit I'd learned to recognize. "Easy for you to say," Colby replied with forced lightness. "Some of us have emotional attachments to family property that can't be measured in dollars. Emotional attachments don't pay mortgages." Marcus shot back with a laugh. "How much are you carrying on that place anyway? Must be substantial to maintain a property that size." Colby changed the subject abruptly, but I filed the exchange away. "Mortgage payments. I'd assumed the lake house was owned free and clear, inherited from his grandfather as he'd described." The second revelation came by accident. Colby had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter while taking a shower, and a notification popped up from his banking app showing a seriously overdrawn account. Before I could stop myself, I glanced at the screen and saw multiple missed payment notices and overdraft fees totaling nearly $800. When he emerged from the bathroom, I was careful to act normally, but my mind was racing. If Colby was struggling financially, his generosity toward me took on a different meaning. Was he genuinely caring for me, or was he making investments in what he thought would become a profitable relationship? The third piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Henrietta finally visited the lake house the following weekend, and her designer eye immediately caught details I'd missed. "This place is gorgeous," she said, as I gave her the tour, "but honey, some of this stuff isn't original to the house." She ran her fingers along the living room mantelpiece. "This fireplace surround was added recently. You can see where the original stone was cut to accommodate it. And these hardwood floors? They're beautiful, but they're not 1920s craftsmanship. These are modern installations." In the kitchen, she pointed out updated electrical work, recent plumbing fixtures, and appliances that were clearly expensive and new. "Someone put serious money into renovating this place in the last few years. We're talking 6 figures easily." That evening, after Henrietta left, I couldn't shake her observations. If Colby had inherited a house that needed substantial renovations, Where had the money come from? His commercial real estate job paid well, but not well enough to fund a complete historic home restoration, while also covering day-to-day expenses. My answer came the following Tuesday, when Colby received a phone call that he took in the garden, thinking I was upstairs working. But the windows were open, and voices carry across water. I understand the timeline pressure, I heard him say, his voice tight with stress. But the situation has changed. I'm in a serious relationship now, and she's got family money coming through an estate settlement. Just give me another few months to figure out the best approach. There was a long pause while the other person spoke. No, she doesn't know about the refinancing yet, or the second mortgage. Look, this property is worth $2.8 million easily. Even if I have to sell, there's plenty of equity to cover what I owe plus interest. But if I can access her inheritance first, I can keep the house and clear the debts. My blood turned to ice. Family money from an estate settlement. He was talking about Sally's inheritance, the one he believed I was receiving from her modest house sale. She's perfect for this, he continued. Grateful, dependent, and completely trusting. She's been through enough trauma that she just wants stability and security. I give her that. She gives me access to her settlement money, and we both get what we need. I gripped the windowsill, my knees threatening to buckle. Every kindness, every gesture of care, every moment I'd felt loved and protected, it had all been calculated. Colby wasn't my savior. He was a predator who'd identified a vulnerable woman and positioned himself to exploit her grief and gratitude. The cruelest part was how perfectly his plan might have worked if Sally's real inheritance had been the modest sum he expected, instead of the fortune she'd actually left me. As I listened to him discussing timeline strategies for accessing my money, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity: Colby Howard was about to discover that he'd chosen the wrong victim. After overhearing Colby's phone conversation, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the sickening realization that the man I'd been falling in love with had been manipulating me from the beginning. But beneath the hurt and betrayal, something else was stirring, a cold, calculating anger that demanded I understand the full scope of his deception before deciding how to respond. The next morning, I waited until Colby left for work before beginning my investigation. If he could research my finances and plan my exploitation, I could certainly return the favor. I started with his home office, a converted bedroom on the second floor that he'd always kept locked, claiming it contained confidential client information. The spare key hung on a hook in the kitchen pantry, something I'd noticed but never questioned until now. The office was meticulously organized, with filing cabinets labeled by year and transaction type. I photographed everything with my phone, working quickly but carefully to avoid disturbing his system. What I found painted a picture of a man drowning in debt and growing increasingly desperate. The Howard family lake house, contrary to Colby's claims, had never been fully paid off. His grandfather had indeed left it to him, but with a substantial existing mortgage that Colby had refinanced 3 times in 5 years, each time pulling out more equity to fund what appeared to be failed business ventures and mounting credit card debt. The most recent refinancing, completed just 2 months before Sally's death, had saddled the property with a $1.8 million mortgage at a brutal interest rate. The monthly payments were nearly $12,000, far more than his real estate commissions could cover sustainably. But the most damning discovery was a folder labeled Investment Opportunities that contained detailed research on grieving widows and their inheritance patterns. Colby had apparently been studying recent obituaries, attending funerals of prominent community members, and tracking which surviving family members might be vulnerable to romantic manipulation. My hands shook as I photographed a handwritten chart with columns labeled Target, Estimated Asset Value, Vulnerability Level, and Approach Strategy. There were 5 names on the list. Mine was at the top, with prime candidate Recent Traumatic Loss, Isolated, Modest Inheritance but Grateful, written in red ink. The other names made my stomach turn. 3 other women who'd lost family members in the past year, all of whom Colby had apparently researched and either approached or planned to approach. One name was crossed out with already remarried, noted beside it. I photographed everything methodically, building a case file that revealed the true scope of his predatory behavior. This wasn't just financial desperation. This was a systematic pattern of targeting vulnerable women for exploitation. Next, I called Archer Livingston from my car, parked at a coffee shop in town where I couldn't be overheard. "I need to ask you something confidential," I said without preamble. "Has anyone been asking questions about Sally's estate or my inheritance?" There was a pause. "That's an unusual question, Miss Brewster. Why do you ask?" I explained about Colby's phone conversation, careful to stick to facts rather than emotions. Archer listened without interruption, and when I finished, his response was immediate and sharp. "Yes, actually. About 3 weeks ago, a man called claiming to be your fiancé. He said you were overseas handling family business and had asked him to inquire about expediting the estate settlement. When I told him I couldn't discuss your affairs with anyone but you directly, he became quite insistent." My heart pounded. "Did he give a name?" "Colby Howard. He seemed to know specific details about your grandmother's death and your living situation, which made his claims seem credible initially. But proper protocol requires direct client authorization for any information sharing." I thanked Archer and hung up, my hands trembling with rage. Colby had been actively trying to access information about my inheritance, spinning lies about engagement and overseas travel to justify his inquiries. That afternoon, I drove to Marcus Brewster's real estate office. As one of Colby's colleagues, he might have insights into Colby's financial situation that I couldn't gather from documents alone. "Noelle, what a pleasant surprise," Marcus said, rising from his desk with genuine warmth. "How's life at the lake treating you?" I'd prepared a cover story about wanting to surprise Colby with information about local investment opportunities, playing into his assumption that I was a supportive girlfriend trying to help her man succeed. "Colby's been so stressed about work lately," I said with practiced concern. "I thought maybe if I understood more about the local market, I could be more supportive." "He mentioned you two have known each other for years." Marcus's expression shifted slightly. "Stressed is one word for it. Look, Noelle, I like you, and I can see you care about him. But Colby's in serious financial trouble. Has been for months. The lake house is leveraged to the hilt, and he's been taking increasingly desperate risks with client funds." My blood chilled. Client funds. He's been using escrow accounts as personal loans, planning to replace the money before closings. It's technically embezzlement, though he frames it as temporary borrowing. So far he's managed to juggle things, but it's only a matter of time before something goes wrong. As I drove home, the full picture crystallized. Colby wasn't just a man in debt looking for a wealthy wife, he was a criminal whose schemes were unraveling. His pursuit of my imagined inheritance wasn't just opportunistic, it was desperate. He needed money immediately to avoid potential prison time. What he didn't know was that the woman he'd targeted as his salvation actually possessed the means to destroy him completely. The question now wasn't whether to expose him, but how to ensure that justice was both swift and complete. Armed with evidence of Colby's crimes and schemes, I spent the next 3 days carefully planning my response. But first, I needed professional guidance from someone who understood both legal implications and strategic timing. I arranged to meet Gemma Brooks, the financial advisor Sally had recommended, at her office in the city. I told Colby I was visiting Henrietta for the day, a lie that came surprisingly easily now that I understood how thoroughly he'd been deceiving me. Gemma's office overlooked the financial district, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that spoke of success and competence. She was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-30s, with sharp eyes and an immediately trustworthy presence. "Your grandmother spoke of you often," Gemma said, as we settled into comfortable chairs around a small conference table. "She was very specific about wanting you to have advisors who would protect your interests above all else." I spread out the documents I'd gathered, photos of Colby's debt records, his research on vulnerable widows, evidence of his embezzlement activities, and records of his attempts to access my inheritance information through Archer's office. Gemma reviewed everything methodically, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "This is significantly worse than garden-variety financial manipulation," she said finally. "This man is running what amounts to a criminal enterprise, targeting traumatized women for exploitation. And the embezzlement," she shook her head, He's looking at serious prison time if this comes to light. What are my options? I asked. Legally, you could report him to the authorities immediately. The embezzlement alone would trigger a criminal investigation. But, she paused, studying my face. I sense you're considering a more strategic approach. I nodded. I want him to face consequences, but I also want to understand the full scope of what he's done. There might be other victims who deserve justice too. Gemma smiled approvingly. Your grandmother would be proud. She had the same instinct for comprehensive justice over quick revenge. She pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Here's what I recommend. We create a documented trail that exposes his entire operation while ensuring you're completely protected. Over the next 2 hours, we developed a plan that was both elegant and devastating. First, I would establish a revocable trust to hold my inheritance, managed by Gemma's firm. This would create a paper trail showing sophisticated financial management that contradicted Colby's assumption of my naivety. More importantly, it would allow me to make strategic moves without him tracking unusual activity in my personal accounts. Second, I would hire a private investigator to document Colby's other targets and gather evidence of his broader predatory pattern. If there were other women he'd approached or planned to approach, they deserved to know what they were dealing with. Third, I would purchase property strategically. Specifically, I would acquire the debt on Colby's lake house mortgage. The current lender, struggling with their own liquidity issues, would likely sell the note at a discount to improve their cash flow. You want to become his mortgage holder? Gemma asked, raising an eyebrow. I want control over his most valuable asset, I replied. If I own his debt, I control his timeline and his options. The beauty of the plan was its legal simplicity. Nothing I was doing was illegal or even ethically questionable. I was simply making informed investment decisions based on publicly available information. We started immediately. Gemma's firm had relationships with distressed debt buyers, and within 48 hours, they'd identified the investment group currently holding Colby's mortgage. The group was indeed interested in selling, particularly when offered a quick cash transaction at 85 cents on the dollar. By Friday afternoon, I owned $1.8 million in debt, secured by the Howard family lake house. Colby had no idea that his mortgage payments were now flowing directly into accounts controlled by the woman he was trying to exploit. The private investigator Gemma recommended was a former FBI agent named Ronald Livingston, who specialized in financial crimes. Within a week, he'd confirmed that Colby had indeed contacted 2 other women from his target list, using variations of the same approach he'd used with me, appearing as a helpful friend during their time of grief, offering comfort and gradually working toward romantic relationships. One woman, a widow named Patricia Mills, had actually given Colby $50,000 to invest in a property deal that existed only on paper. She'd been too embarrassed to report the theft, believing she'd simply made a poor investment decision. The other, Sandra Hayes, had become suspicious when Colby started asking detailed questions about her late husband's life insurance policy. She'd stopped returning his calls, but she'd never reported his behavior to authorities. Ronald documented everything meticulously, building a case file that revealed a pattern of predatory behavior spanning at least 2 years. More importantly, he helped both women understand that they'd been targeted by a professional con artist, not simply manipulated by a smooth-talking opportunist. By the end of the second week, I had assembled what amounted to a complete dossier on Colby Howard's criminal activities. I owned his house debt, had evidence of multiple victims, and possessed documentation of his embezzlement scheme. Most satisfying of all, he had no idea that anything had changed. He continued treating me like a grief-stricken, financially dependent woman grateful for his protection, never suspecting that his victim had become his judge, jury, and executioner. The stage was set for the final act, and Colby Howard was about to discover that some prey fight back. With my strategic pieces in place, I returned to the lake house and resumed my role as the grateful, dependent girlfriend. But maintaining the facade became increasingly difficult as Colby's behavior grew more manipulative and desperate with each passing day. It started with subtle financial pressure disguised as romantic planning. One evening over dinner, Colby casually mentioned he'd been researching honeymoon destinations. I know we haven't officially discussed marriage yet, he said, refilling my wine glass with practiced charm, but I can't stop thinking about our future together. Maybe somewhere tropical, the Maldives or Bora Bora. I found some incredible overwater bungalows that would be perfect for celebrating. I kept my expression neutral despite the bile rising in my throat. Those sound expensive. Not if we book early and pay cash, he replied smoothly. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Now that Sally's estate is almost settled, we should discuss combining our finances. Joint accounts, shared investment strategies, that sort of thing. It makes sense for couples who are serious about building a life together. The audacity was breathtaking. He was essentially asking me to hand over my inheritance while framing it as romantic commitment. I thought the estate settlement was still months away, I said carefully. Colby's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, these things can be expedited if necessary. I actually spoke with your lawyer's office about speeding up the process.
So you did what?
I let genuine shock color my voice. Just a preliminary inquiry, he backtracked quickly. I told them I was your fiancé, and that we were planning a wedding. I thought it might help if they knew you had family support during this process. I stared at him across the dinner table. This man who'd lied about being my fiancé to try accessing my inheritance, and forced myself to respond with hurt confusion rather than the fury I felt.
Colby, you can't contact my lawyers without telling me.
And we're not engaged. His hand reached across the table to cover mine, his thumb stroking my knuckles in a gesture I'd once found comforting.
You're right, and I apologize.
I got ahead of myself, because I'm so excited about our future. But maybe it's time we made things official? Before I could respond, he was reaching into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made my stomach drop. Inside was a stunning emerald-cut diamond, easily 3 carats, set in platinum.
Noelle, he said, dropping to one knee beside my chair, will you marry me?
The ring was beautiful and obviously expensive, far more expensive than someone drowning in debt should be able to afford. I realized with sick certainty that he'd probably purchased it with embezzled client funds, gambling everything on his ability to access my supposed inheritance. Colby, this is so sudden, I managed, playing the overwhelmed girlfriend.
It's beautiful, but I need time to think.
His smile faltered slightly. Time to think? Noelle, we've been together for almost a year. We're living together, building a life together. What is there to think about? Marriage is a big step, I said, carefully removing the ring from the box and setting it on the table between us. Especially so soon after losing Sally, I want to be sure I'm making decisions clearly, not just because I'm grateful for your support during a difficult time. The mask slipped then, just for a moment. I saw calculation behind his eyes, frustration that his timeline wasn't working as planned. But he recovered quickly, forcing his expression back to loving concern.
Of course, darling, take all the time you need.
But maybe we could at least start the financial planning process? Even if we're not officially engaged, it would be smart to discuss how we'll manage money once you receive your inheritance. Over the following days, his pressure increased. He brought up the engagement ring constantly, asking if I'd thought more about his proposal. He scheduled appointments with wedding planners, just to get ideas, and left brochures for Caribbean resorts scattered around the house. More concerning was how his behavior toward me began to shift when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I caught him searching through my purse one afternoon, claiming he was looking for pain relievers for a headache. Another time, I found him in my temporary office, supposedly tidying up, but clearly rifling through my design portfolios and client files. The real breaking point came when Henrietta called to invite me to her birthday celebration in the city. Absolutely not, Colby said flatly when I mentioned the invitation. Henrietta's parties are always disasters. Remember her last birthday? You came home drunk and crying because some guy hit on you inappropriately. I frowned, confused. That never happened, Colby. Henrietta's birthday last year was a quiet dinner with 6 people at that Italian restaurant. You're misremembering, he said with absolute confidence. Trust me, you were a mess. I had to take care of you for days afterward. That's exactly the kind of toxic environment you need to avoid right now. The gaslighting was so blatant, so confident, that for a moment I questioned my own memory. But I knew exactly what had happened at Henrietta's birthday. We'd had a lovely evening, and I'd come home happy and slightly tipsy, telling Colby all about the evening while he listened with apparent interest. I think I should go, I said quietly. Henrietta is my oldest friend. Fine, he snapped, the pretense of patience finally cracking. But don't expect me to clean up the mess when you spiral into another grief episode, because you're not ready to handle social situations. As I watched him storm out of the room, I realized that the caring, supportive man I'd thought I was living with had never really existed. In his place was someone who grew more controlling and cruel as his desperation increased. The final act was approaching, and Colby Howard was about to discover that his perfectly planned manipulation had become his own destruction. The week leading up to Henrietta's birthday party became a battlefield of wills, with Colby escalating his controlling behavior to levels that would have terrified me if I hadn't known exactly what he was doing and why. On Monday, he announced that his business partner Marcus needed to use our house for an important client dinner on Friday, the same night as Henrietta's party. It's a multi-million-dollar deal, he explained, not meeting my eyes as he rearranged papers on his desk. These clients specifically requested a lakefront setting, and Marcus's place doesn't have the right ambiance. I promised you could host us the evening, show off your design skills, make the right connections. This could be huge for both our careers. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. He was trying to create a conflict between my friendship and his supposed business needs, positioning himself as the reasonable party who was offering me professional opportunities. I already committed to Henrietta, I said calmly, but you don't need me to host us a business dinner. You and Marcus are perfectly capable of entertaining clients. His face darkened. This isn't just about entertainment, Noelle. These are the kind of people who could transform our financial situation. The kind of contacts we need if we're going to build the life we've been planning. Our financial situation, I raised an eyebrow. I thought your business was doing well. It is, he said quickly, but expansion requires capital, investment opportunities. The kind of money that comes from your inheritance combined with the right business relationships. There it was, another direct reference to accessing my inheritance. He wasn't even bothering to be subtle anymore. By Wednesday, when I still hadn't agreed to cancel my plans, Colby's approach shifted to emotional manipulation. He started having mysterious phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, followed by long sighs and comments about impossible situations, and timing couldn't be worse. "What's wrong?" I asked, after one particularly theatrical display. "Nothing you need to worry about," he replied, with martyr-like resignation. "Just some business complications that require immediate attention. But I don't want to burden you with my problems." When I pressed for details, he painted a picture of a deal falling through, potential financial ruin, and desperate need for liquid capital to save everything he'd worked for. "If only the estate settlement would come through," he said, staring out at the lake with practiced melancholy. "Even a portion of it would be enough to stabilize things until the market improves." I wanted to laugh at the performance, but something about his increasing desperation made me uneasy. Cornered animals were dangerous, and Colby was clearly feeling trapped by his mounting debts and failed timeline. Thursday evening brought the most concerning escalation yet. I returned from a client meeting to find Colby in my office, my laptop open on the desk before him. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Your computer was making strange noises," he said, without looking up from the screen. "I thought it might be overheating, so I opened it to check. You should probably back up your files. Technology can be so unreliable." It was a weak excuse, and we both knew it. He'd been searching through my files, probably looking for financial information or correspondence with lawyers about the estate. What he didn't know was that I'd been careful to keep all sensitive documents on encrypted drives that he couldn't access. "I can handle my own computer maintenance," I said, moving to close the laptop. His hand shot out to stop me, gripping my wrist with surprising force. "I was just trying to help," he said, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "You don't need to be so defensive about everything." For a moment we stood frozen in that position, his hand tight around my wrist, both of us recognizing that a line had been crossed. When he finally released me, his expression immediately shifted to concerned contrition. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I'm under a lot of stress lately, and I took it out on you. That was completely inappropriate." But the damage was done, physical intimidation however brief, revealed the violence lurking beneath his charming facade. I rubbed my wrist where his fingers had left red marks, and something cold and final settled in my chest. That night, I called Gemma from my car in the hospital parking lot, where I'd driven to ensure privacy. "The situation is escalating," I reported. "He's getting desperate, and desperation makes people unpredictable. I think it's time to accelerate our timeline." "Agreed," Gemma replied immediately. "I've been monitoring his financial accounts through our debt ownership. He missed another mortgage payment this week, and his business checking account is overdrawn by nearly $15,000. He's running out of options, which means he's about to become dangerous. What's our next move?" "We trigger the foreclosure process. As the mortgage holder, you have the right to call the loan due immediately upon missed payments. Once foreclosure proceedings begin, he'll have 30 days to either pay the full amount or vacate the property." I thought about the house that had been my sanctuary, the place where I'd healed from Sally's death and fallen in love with what I thought was a good man. Soon it would be mine completely, and Colby would discover that the woman he'd tried to exploit actually held the power to destroy him. "Do it," I said. "Send the notice tomorrow." The final countdown had begun, and Colby Howard was about to learn what it felt like to lose everything. Friday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn morning that made the lake look like a mirror reflecting the changing leaves. I had decided to attend Henrietta's birthday party, regardless of Colby's objections, and I spent the morning preparing both mentally and physically for what I suspected would be our final confrontation. The foreclosure notice had been delivered by certified mail that morning while Colby was at work. I watched through the kitchen window as the postal carrier required his signature, seeing Colby's face change as he read the return address from Lakeside Financial Holdings, the company name Gemma had registered to hold my interest in his debt. He stormed into the house, clutching the envelope, his face a mask of panic and rage that he was no longer bothering to hide. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving the document in the air. "The bank is calling my loan? That's impossible. I have arrangements, payment plans, legal protections." I looked up from my coffee with carefully manufactured confusion. "What's wrong? What happened?" "My mortgage has been sold to some company I've never heard of, and they're demanding full payment in 30 days or they'll foreclose." His hands were shaking as he read through the legal documents. "This can't be legal. You can't just sell someone's mortgage without notice." "Actually, you can," I said quietly. "Mortgages are bought and sold all the time. It's standard practice in the financial industry." He stared at me with something approaching suspicion. "How would you know about mortgage transfers?" I shrugged, maintaining my facade of naive ignorance. "I've been reading about real estate since Sally's house sale." "You pick things up." Colby began pacing the kitchen like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair and muttering calculations under his breath. $1.8 million in 30 days. That's impossible. Even if I liquidate everything, even if I borrow against my future commissions." He stopped suddenly, turning to face me with desperate eyes. "The estate settlement. We need to push harder for an emergency disbursement. This is exactly the kind of situation that qualifies for expedited processing." "Colby, I told you the estate lawyers said it could be months before everything is finalized. Then we make them move faster," he said, his voice taking on a manic edge. "We hire a different lawyer, we file emergency motions, we do whatever it takes. This house is our future, Noelle, our children's inheritance. We can't lose it because of bureaucratic delays. Our children's inheritance." The presumption was staggering. He was already mentally spending money he thought I would inherit, planning a future built on exploitation and lies. "Maybe this is a sign," I said carefully. "Maybe we should consider downsizing, finding something more affordable. A smaller place could be just as happy." "No," his voice cracked like a whip. "Absolutely not. This house has been in my family for generations. My grandfather built his legacy here. My father planned to retire here. I will not be the Howard who loses the family property because his wife was too selfish to access readily available funds." Wife. Another assumption. Another indication of how completely he'd planned my future without my consent. "I'm not your wife," I said quietly. "You will be," he replied, with chilling certainty. "We're getting married next month. and you're going to sign whatever papers are necessary to access that inheritance immediately. This is not a discussion. The mask had finally dropped completely. No more charm, no more manipulation, just raw demand backed by barely contained violence. And if I refuse? I asked. His smile was cold and calculating. You won't refuse. You have nowhere else to go, no family left, a struggling business that barely covers your expenses. You need me, Noelle. You need this stability, this home, this relationship. Without me, you're just another lonely woman grieving in a tiny apartment. I stood slowly, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate care. You know what I think, Colby. I think you're the one who's desperate. I think your business is failing. Your debts are overwhelming you, and you targeted me because you thought I'd be an easy mark. A grieving woman with inheritance money you could access and control. His face went white, then flushed deep red. That's ridiculous. I love you. You love what you think I can give you, I corrected. You've been planning this from the moment you appeared at Sally's funeral. The caring boyfriend act, the rushed proposal, the constant questions about my finances, it's all been a con game. You're being paranoid and ungrateful, he snarled, stepping closer in a way that felt distinctly threatening. I saved you from complete breakdown. I gave you a home, stability, a future, and this is how you repay me. With conspiracy theories and accusations, I repay you by seeing through your lies, I said, backing toward the kitchen door, and by refusing to be your victim any longer. That's when he snapped completely. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into the same spot where he'd gripped me the night before, but harder this time, hard enough to leave bruises. You're not going anywhere, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You're going to call your lawyers right now and demand emergency access to your inheritance. We're going to save this house, and then we're going to have a very serious discussion about your attitude and your responsibilities as my future wife. As I looked into his eyes, cold, calculating, completely without the warmth I'd once thought I saw there, I realized that Colby Howard had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had no idea who he was really threatening. I wrenched my arm free from Colby's grip and stepped back, my heart pounding but my voice steady. Take your hands off me, now or what, he sneered, but I could see uncertainty flickering behind his bravado. You'll leave? With what money? In what car? Everything you have I gave you. The car is registered in my name, I said calmly, and I have more money than you know. Something in my tone made him pause. For the first time since I'd known him, Colby looked genuinely confused rather than calculating. What's that supposed to mean? Instead of answering, I pulled out my phone and dialed Gemma's direct line. She answered on the first ring. Gemma, it's Noelle. Could you please confirm the current balance in the Brewster Trust account? Certainly. As of this morning, the trust holds $3.2 million in liquid assets, plus the 2 lakefront properties, valued at approximately $2.8 million. Total net worth just over $6 million. I kept my eyes locked on Colby's face as his expression shifted from confusion to shock to dawning horror. And could you confirm the recent purchase made through the trust? Yes, the trust acquired the mortgage debt on 1847 Oak Lane for $1.53 million. You now hold the full mortgage on the property, which gives you the right to foreclose upon any missed payments. Colby's face went ashen. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly as the implications crashed over him. Thank you, Gemma. I'll speak with you later. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Surprise. That's impossible, he whispered. Your grandmother was poor. The estate settlement was never what you thought it was, I finished. Sally left me wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. The modest house sale was just to cover her debts. The real inheritance was lakefront property and investments you never knew existed. Colby sank into a kitchen chair, his head in his hands. How long have you known about the inheritance? Months, about your debts and your scheme to exploit me. Weeks, about your embezzlement from client accounts. Long enough to document everything. His head snapped up. You can't prove embezzlement. Actually, I can. Amazing what a good private investigator can uncover when he has the right motivation. I also know about Patricia Mills and the $50,000 you stole from her. And Sandra Hayes, who you tried to charm before she got suspicious and stopped returning your calls. The color drained completely from his face. What do you want? Nothing from you, I said. I own your mortgage now, Colby. This house belongs to me. You have 30 days to pay $1.8 million or vacate the property. Considering your current financial situation, I think we both know which option is more realistic. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't do this. This is my family's house. My grandfather, your grandfather, would be ashamed, I interrupted. You've mortgaged his legacy into oblivion to fund failed schemes and criminal activity. I'm not taking anything from you. You've already lost it through your own choices. Please, he said. And for the first time his voice cracked with genuine desperation. We can work this out. We can still get married, combine our assets. You don't have to destroy me. I looked at this man who had manipulated my grief, exploited my vulnerability, and planned to steal my inheritance, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. I'm not destroying you, Colby. I'm simply refusing to save you from the consequences of your own actions. The reckoning had finally begun. The silence that followed my revelation stretched between us like a chasm. Colby sat frozen in his chair, staring at me as if I were a stranger who had just materialized in his kitchen. In many ways, I suppose I was. You've been lying to me this entire time, he said, finally, his voice hollow. No more than you've been lying to me, I replied. The difference is my deception was self-protection. Yours was predatory. He stood abruptly and began pacing again, but this time his movements were erratic, desperate. This is insane. You're telling me you've been sitting on millions of dollars while watching me struggle with debt. While I worried about losing everything, I've been watching you manipulate a grieving woman for financial gain, I corrected. There's a difference. I love you, he shouted, slamming his hand against the kitchen counter. Everything I did was to build a future for us. You researched vulnerable widows like I was livestock at auction. You have a chart, Colby. I photographed it. 5 names, ranked by vulnerability and estimated asset value. Which part of that was love? His face crumpled as he realized the full scope of what I'd uncovered. You went through my private files? The same way you went through my computer and my purse and tried to access my inheritance through my lawyer. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of his handwritten target list. Patricia Mills gave you $50,000. Where is it now? That was an investment. That was theft. And when this goes to the authorities, it's going to be treated as part of a larger pattern of fraud. I swiped to another photo. Your embezzlement from client escrow accounts. Your systematic targeting of bereaved women. Your lies about this house being mortgage-free when you've refinanced it 3 times. Colby's legs seemed to give out. He collapsed back into the chair, his face buried in his hands. What do you want from me? I want you gone, I said simply. Out of this house, which is now mine. Away from Patricia Mills and Sandra Hayes, and any other women you might target in the future. I want you to face the consequences of your choices. And if I refuse to leave, I pulled up another contact on my phone. Then I called Detective Hayden Brooks at the Financial Crimes Unit. He's been very interested in the evidence I've compiled about your activities. The fight went out of him completely. He looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. How long do I have? Legally, 30 days under the foreclosure notice. Practically, I want you gone by tomorrow. Your clothes, your personal items, whatever actually belongs to you. Take it and leave. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem to solve anymore. I moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Colby, if you had been honest with me from the beginning, if you had told me about your debts and asked for help as a partner rather than a mark, things might have been different. Sally taught me to help people who deserved it. But I never had that chance, he said bitterly. You were lying about the money from day one. I was protecting myself from exactly this scenario, I replied, and apparently I was right to do so. As I walked out of the kitchen, leaving him sitting alone with the wreckage of his schemes, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, but relief. The weight of deception, of playing a role, of constantly being on guard, lifted from my shoulders. Tomorrow, Colby Howard would be gone, and I could finally begin living honestly in the home that was truly mine. I spent that evening at Henrietta's birthday party, celebrating with genuine friends while Colby presumably packed his belongings. For the first time in months, I felt completely present, laughing at jokes, enjoying conversations, and sharing the real story of what had been happening in my life. "I can't believe you played the long game like that," Henrietta said, refilling my wine glass, as we sat on her apartment balcony overlooking the city. "You're like a financial ninja." "I learned from the best," I replied, thinking of Sally's quiet strength and patient wisdom. She always said that the best revenge was living well while your enemies destroyed themselves. When I returned to the lake house the next morning, I found it transformed. Colby's belongings were gone. His clothes, his office files, his expensive electronics, even his coffee maker. But he'd left behind something unexpected: a letter on the kitchen counter, handwritten on his personal stationery. "Noelle," it began, "I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to, but I need you to understand that my feelings for you were real, even if my methods were wrong. I fell in love with you that first night we met, long before I knew anything about your financial situation. When Sally died, and you needed help, I genuinely wanted to take care of you." I read on, fascinated by his attempt to rewrite history even in defeat. The debt situation spiraled beyond my control. I made desperate choices that I'm not proud of. But I never meant to hurt you personally. I thought if I could access your inheritance, I could solve my problems, and then we could build a real life together without the pressure of financial stress. The letter continued for 2 pages, a masterclass in self-justification and selective memory. He painted himself as a victim of circumstances, rather than the architect of his own destruction, claiming that if I had simply been honest about my wealth from the beginning, none of this would have happened. The final paragraph was particularly revealing. "I've spoken with a lawyer about challenging the foreclosure. There may be legal remedies available, especially given the timing of the mortgage sale and your concealment of assets during our relationship. This isn't over, Noelle. I won't give up on us, or on this house without a fight." I set the letter aside, and called Gemma immediately. "He's threatening legal action," I reported. "Let him try," she replied with amusement. Every document was filed properly, every transaction was legal, and every deadline was met according to the terms of his original mortgage. Plus, his lawyer will quickly discover the criminal evidence we've compiled. No competent attorney will want to represent him once they understand the full situation. That afternoon, my prediction proved accurate. Colby's lawyer called, asking to meet and discuss amicable resolution options. By evening, Colby himself appeared at the front door, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine desperation. "The lawyer says I don't have grounds to challenge the foreclosure," he said through the screen door. "He also says, you have evidence of financial crimes that could send me to prison." "That's correct," I replied, not inviting him inside. "What would it take for you to destroy that evidence?" I looked at this man who had tried to steal my future, and felt only emptiness where love had once lived. "Nothing you have to offer," I said, and closed the door. Through the window, I watched him drive away for the final time, his car disappearing around the bend that led away from Lake Serenity forever. The first week alone in the lake house was both liberating and disorienting. For months, I'd grown accustomed to the constant undercurrent of tension that came with living a lie, always watching my words, always playing a role. Now, surrounded by silence broken only by lapping water and bird songs, I could finally exhale completely. I spent hours walking the property that was now truly mine, seeing it with new eyes. The garden paths that previous generations of Howard men had built, the ancient oak tree with initials carved in its bark, the dock where Colby's grandfather had supposedly proposed. All of it belonged to me now, not through manipulation or deception, but through legal purchase and rightful ownership. The irony wasn't lost on me. Colby had tried to use this house as bait, offering me a home and stability in exchange for access to wealth he thought I didn't yet possess. Instead, I'd ended up owning the very property he'd used to manipulate me, purchasing it with money he'd never known existed. 3 weeks after his departure, Detective Hayden Brooks contacted me about pressing charges against Colby for the embezzlement and fraud. The evidence I'd compiled, combined with Patricia Mills's testimony and records from his real estate firm, painted a clear picture of systematic financial crimes spanning 2 years. He's been stealing from client escrow accounts to fund his lifestyle and pay debts, Detective Brooks explained during our meeting. The total amount appears to be close to $400,000. His firm is cooperating fully. They're facing potential liability issues if they don't distance themselves completely. What happens next? I asked. Grand jury indictment, most likely. With the evidence we have, he's looking at serious prison time, 5 to 7 years, minimum. He paused, studying my face. How do you feel about that? It was a question I'd been asking myself. Did I feel satisfaction, revenge, justice? The answer was more complex than I'd expected. I feel finished, I said finally. Not happy about his destruction, but relieved that he can't hurt anyone else the way he tried to hurt me. That evening, I received a call from Patricia Mills, the widow who'd lost $50,000 to Colby's fake investment scheme. I wanted to thank you, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. For months, I thought I was just a foolish old woman who'd made a terrible financial mistake. Learning that I was targeted by a professional con artist, it doesn't get my money back, but it gives me back my dignity. You were never foolish, I told her. You were grieving and vulnerable, and he exploited that. The foolishness was all his. After the call ended, I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and rose. For the first time since Sally's death, I felt truly at peace. Not because I'd destroyed someone who'd wronged me, but because I'd protected myself and others from future harm. Sally had left me more than money and property. She'd given me the tools to recognize my own strength. Her greatest gift wasn't the inheritance that had enabled my revenge, but the wisdom to know when to use it and when to walk away. The girl who'd been thrown out with nothing but a suitcase was gone. In her place sat a woman who understood that true power wasn't about destroying enemies, but about protecting what mattered most. 6 months later, I stood in the same kitchen where Colby had once demanded access to my inheritance, but everything had changed. The space had been completely renovated, my first project using my design skills on my own home. Gone were the dark granite countertops and heavy cabinets that had reflected the Howard family's traditional aesthetic. In their place, I'd installed warm butcher block surfaces, custom white cabinetry, and windows expanded to capture more of the lake view. The house felt lighter, more open, more truly mine than it ever had when I was living there as Colby's dependent girlfriend. Henrietta visited often now, no longer needing to navigate around a controlling boyfriend who monitored my friendships. She was helping me prepare for a dinner party, my first as the official owner of the property, celebrating the launch of my expanded design business. It's incredible how much this place has changed, she said, arranging flowers in one of Sally's crystal vases that now held a place of honor on the kitchen island. It feels completely different from when you first brought me here. That's because it reflects who I actually am now, not who someone else wanted me to be, I replied, checking the wine selection I'd laid out for the evening's guests. The guest list included my new business partners, the financial team that managed my inheritance, and Detective Brooks, who had become an unexpected friend during the legal proceedings against Colby. The case had concluded 3 weeks earlier with his sentencing to 6 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse. I felt no satisfaction in his imprisonment, but I did feel justice in knowing that Patricia Mills had recovered her stolen money through victim restitution, and that Sandra Hayes and other potential targets had been warned about predatory romance scams. Have you heard anything about how he's adjusting to prison life? Henrietta asked, reading my thoughts with the intuition of old friendship. I don't ask, and no one volunteers information, I said honestly. That chapter of my life is closed. I spent too many months focused on his lies and schemes. I won't spend any more time thinking about his consequences. As the afternoon sun slanted through the new windows, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The scared, grieving woman who'd accepted Colby's offer of shelter would barely recognize the confident business owner I'd become. My design firm now employed 4 people and had a waiting list of clients who sought out my signature style of blending modern functionality with timeless elegance. More importantly, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people and situations. The red flags I'd ignored with Colby would never escape my notice again. The doorbell chimed as the first guests arrived for the evening, and I moved to welcome them into my home, truly my home, purchased with my money, decorated according to my vision, filled with people I'd chosen to invite. As laughter and conversation filled the spaces where manipulation and control had once lived, I realized that Sally's greatest gift hadn't been the money she'd left me. It had been the time and space to discover who I was when no one was trying to reshape me for their own purposes. Standing in my beautiful kitchen, surrounded by genuine friends, I finally understood what Sally had meant when she wrote that money was just a tool. The real inheritance was the strength to use it wisely, and the wisdom to know that my worth had never depended on what I owned, but on who I chose to become. The lake stretched endlessly beyond my windows, reflecting the sky like a mirror of infinite possibility. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, the future felt entirely my own.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.